Welcome to the AntiTribe's The Freakin Weekend. Our topics are antisemitism and influencers. Brought to you by J.P. Morgan Chase, official banker of Jeffrey Epstein. Starring Nick Fuentes. The Tate brothers, original gangster of conspiracy theories. Alex Jones of InfoWars. There's a battle for your mind, even though it's empty.
Welcome to AntiTribe, The Freakin Weekend. I am your host, Goel, and today we'll be visiting on a familiar topic, ethno-supremacy in action vis-a-vis Zionist Jews manipulating the news and the cultural cycle yet again. One of the things that I want you as a viewer to understand is that Zionists and their chief beneficiaries in Talmudic or Kabbalistic Judaism have long understood that the way to win any argument or conflict is to control both sides of the argument and to control the terms of the argument. And they are undeniably good at it, even brilliant. Anyone who tells you that a Zionist or a Talmudist or a Kabbalist is stupid is an idiot. Nothing you see in the way of influencers or politicians gets to the level of influence on social media or public platforms or in the general culture without the backing or permission of Zionist, Talmudist, and Kabbalist. Nothing. They control all the pipelines of information and culture, and you should view even their detractors, like myself, with deep suspicion. You should think critically. Both sides against the middle is the key to their dialectic. To wit, recent developments in the viral culture of the internet have confirmed this yet again. But the Goyim are so busy lapping up the resulting confusion that they don't think analytically or rationally or critically about what it is that they're consuming. Here at AntiTribe, we don't care so much what you think. We only care that you have the knowledge and aptitude of how to think. That's the point of this episode. I want you as a viewer, as a consumer of ideas and points of view, to know how to think for yourself about what it is that you're consuming and viewing. Now, the good news is that Zionists, Talmudists, and Kabbalists make it perfectly easy to see what it is they're doing and how they're doing it as long as you think critically rather than ideologically. They always tell us what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it. They always show us their agenda. You just have to be thinking analytically rather than emotionally about that when you see it. They send us useful or pretend Goyim to bear the messages that they think we want to hear, that we usually do want to hear, about any number of topics. But those Goyim are mere pawns on a chessboard where both players, black and white, are moving the rest of us towards a checkmate. The abstract and the concrete, whereby every phenomena that you observe appears separate and isolated, even in opposition, as opposed to being part of a greater whole, driven through interplay towards a concrete resolution or goal, that is an illusion. And the question here is, the central question here, is why do Zionists, Talmudists, and Kabbalistic Jews do what they do? Because they're gods, at least in their own mind.
I just want to say this to our Christian friends, you know, just to call it as it is and say it straight out, you know, you guys are worshiping one Jew. That's a mistake. You should be worshiping every single one of us because we all die for your sins every single day. And that's exactly what's going on here. Yeah. We're all God's firstborn, and we're dying for your sins right now because the Jewish people in the land of Israel are the bulwark against the orcs. Mm-hmm. Okay? The orcs are coming not to a theater near you, but to your home.
Lots to unpack in that clip. You know, it's blatantly racist. It's also blatantly blasphemous from a Christian perspective. He's saying that Jews die for our sins if we are Gentiles. He's saying that they are a bulwark against the orcs, and I guess that means non-Jews such as Muslims, Arabs, the various other ethnic groups in the area of the Middle East that you serve as a bulwark or defense against for the West. That's what he's saying for Christians, that you should worship us because we're gods and because we are saving you from the orcs, that is, the non-Jews who they do not consider human. Well, the problem with that rationale is that in the Jewish mind, we're Gentiles too. But the bigger thing that you need to understand here is that for the Jew, they're bending reality to their will as gods on earth to achieve outcomes. The rest of us are merely pieces in a game as they bring about what the Jewish thinker Maurice Samuel, in his book You Gentiles, referred to as the God world. The world of perfect social justice in which their Mashiach or Messiah can arrive. And when this happens, all oppositions will be reconciled in a result in which Jews exist at the top of a social and spiritual hierarchy of the world as gods, with thousands of Gentile slaves, depending on who you talk to, up to 2,600 Gentile slaves per Jew to serve as their every physical need and whim as they study Torah. So the Jew exists in a world of ideas and ideals, and they give Gentiles a game to get to the idealized outcome that they seek. They're on a 6,000-year calendar. We're currently, I believe, in year 5,784. All obstacles, primarily consisting of Gentiles with an identity that opposes the Zionist or Talmudist or Kabbalistic conception, namely Christians who have an identity that posits the abolition of distinction between Gentiles and Jews. All of that must be obliterated in order for the Mashiach to come. That is why you hear about whiteness so much and the need to abolish whiteness, because that's how they see non-Jews, especially Christian Jews, as white supremacists. They believe that if you're Christian, you're going to be anti-Semitic. And for them, anti-Semitism is to oppose Zionist ideology, Talmudic Judaism, and Kabbalism. If you oppose any of those three things, which are interwoven with each other in most cases, you are anti-Semitic, you're racist, you're against Judaism, you're against Jews. So the U.S. population was 90% white in the 1920s, but through deliberate policies, immigration, practices, it has descended to a mere 59.2% today. And the reality is that a substantial portion of that 59.2% of white people in America is embracing demographic suicide today because they see their whiteness as a source of all the world's social ills. And so these Zionists have been very successful in convincing white people to hate themselves, white people to despise their whiteness. So white people aren't fighting Jews for the survival of their demographic majority. They're fighting each other. And on one side of the white spectrum, you have people who have brought into the notion that whiteness is the problem, and the other side clings to the notion that whiteness is a solution. And then there are those of us in the middle who do not see ourselves as, the sum total of our identity is not our skin color, it's our Christianity, our faith. Now, Christianity posits that there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female, but all are one in Christ Jesus. Now, this might sound like the kind of utopian ideal that Jews ought to support, but it isn't. Jews very much believe in racial and ethnic distinction between Jews and non-Jews. And they believe that Jews are superior to non-Jews and entitled to rule non-Jews. Any ideology that posits that non-Jews are equal to Jews, that gives a non-Jew or a Gentile the goyim, the concept or the identity that they are equal in value, equal in worth to Jews, that there is a path for non-Jews to enjoy equality with Jews before God, is automatically anti-Jewish and erodes the special Jewish position. That's why Zionists, Talmudists, and Kabbalists are opposed to Christianity. It's why they seek to co-opt Christianity by carving out divisions in Christianity through hyphenates or qualifiers like Zionist Christianity or Zionist Christians. At the end of the day, no one should care about ethnicity or skin color as the basis of racial distinction, because under Christ, all are one in Christ Jesus. Race is a social construct that didn't exist before the late 18th or early 19th centuries, And like most social constructs, race exists solely to denigrate the personhood of entire groups and or to divide those groups against each other. That is, race, ethnicity, these are artifices from the Christian perspective. All are one in Christ Jesus. These distinctions that have been foisted on us cease to exist when we become one in Christ. Now, you shouldn't dislike a Jew for being ethnically Jewish. That's an immutable characteristic, one that you were created with by God. Anyone who dislikes you for who you are, for a characteristic that you cannot change, such as your skin color or your biological sex, a physical expression of your genetic phenotypes, is automatically satanic and evil. We are all created in the image of God. That's the Christian position and doctrine known as Imago Dei. It is entirely appropriate to dislike someone for their beliefs and practices and choices, because these are not immutable characteristics. These are deliberate decisions, and ethno-supremacists justify those decisions by connecting them to an underlying immutable characteristic, such as their skin color, their ethnicity, and supremacists as a whole. And I want to make this very clear. This isn't just Jews that we're talking about. This isn't just Zionist or Talmudist or Kabbalist. Supremacists as a whole make the argument that the differences that exist among us, like biological sex, suffice as a foundation for supremacist thought and practice. Men should lead women, and women should submit to men, even when men act inappropriately or abusively, because men are men regardless of how they act or behave. And the order of things is that women follow men. That's the argument that's made to justify even bad male behavior. What supremacists never tell you about their authority is that authority, as granted by God to those in authority, it exists so they might serve God and serve others. Authority is never a license for abuse or depravity. It is never a privilege. Instead, it's a burden that one bears for the purposes of magnifying God and fulfilling His purpose. The most clear example of this is Christ, God incarnate, the Word incarnate, who went to the cross for the sins of man so that they might find redemption and salvation. Now, rebellion rightly arises when someone in authority abuses that authority not to serve God, but to serve himself or herself at the expense of both God and man. That is, you're exploiting the people underneath you in a hierarchy of authority rather than serving them. There is a solution to the world and its ills, and it is Christ. There is a perpetuation of those ills. And it is everything else in the way of ideology or belief outside of Christianity. Christianity is realized in Christ crucified on the cross for the sins of all men and women, is its own instruction. Christ didn't walk the earth enriching himself. He didn't walk the earth edifying or exalting himself at the expense of others. He went to execution, or to an execution, reserved for the social dregs of the empire in which he lived. A capital punishment designed to humiliate and degrade anyone who received it, and he did it to serve you and me. Remember how the Roman centurions who tortured Christ behaved, what they said to him. You're the king of the Jews. Save yourself, if you're really a king. But what Christ understood is that his kingship and his authority existed to serve his Father's purpose and to serve our interest in terms of giving us a path forward to salvation and redemption from sin. The Father who sent him did so as a parent sacrificing his only child for his creatures. Christ wasn't created. He was begotten of the Father. He was co-eternal. He existed before time and creation. He was the means by which the Father created all of us in his image, because in the beginning was the Word, and through the Word everything was created. Now, he created the rest of the creation for our enjoyment and our sustenance. He loved us enough to give us his begotten Son, the visible image of the invisible Father, in whom all the fullness of the Father dwelled, as it said in the New Testament. and to send us a helper in the form of an indwelling spirit after the Son returned to the Father upon his resurrection. Each one testifies of the other in the Godhead. The Spirit descended upon the Son in the form of a dove, and the Father's voice testified from heaven that Christ was his Son. Christ's earthly ministry testified of his Father and his Father's purpose that all men would be saved through Christ if only they believed. For the Jews, this new way, and it was designated as the way in the Acts of the Apostles, was alarming. The Gentiles now had a basis to obliterate the divisions of identity, or the divisions in identity between Jews and Gentiles. God loved them enough to save them as well as the Jews. Christ explicitly said that the kingdom had been taken away from the fruitless Jews and given to a people that produced the fruits of his kingdom, or his Father's kingdom. The Jews had murdered the prophets. That's indisputable. It's in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament. They sawed Isaiah in half. They murdered the Son of God in Christ Jesus. They rejected the prophets and the message from God that the prophets brought to them. They rejected the Messiah, and they rejected God by extension. They violated the covenant. I mean, in Ezekiel, it says that on the same day that they sacrificed their children in temples to pagan gods like Baal and Asherah, they would go into the sanctuary of God and make offering to him. That's the Jewish way in the Old Testament. That's according to their own holy books. So for the Gentiles who served powers and principalities and made a fortune doing so, that is, the Gentiles who worship false gods, idols, demons, basically, the nascent faith that called itself the Way was a direct economic threat to their power and their wealth. In Acts 19:23 through 41, the silversmiths who made their fortune in Ephesus attacked Christians because if those Christians succeeded, the silversmiths who made their fortune in Ephesus, the demand for their idols, that is, idols of Artemis manufactured by those silversmiths, worshipped by the Ephesians, that demand would cease. For the Roman Empire, the new faith, the Way, was a direct threat to their social and economic order, because if Christ was true, the divinity of the Roman emperor and the entire order stemming from that claim was false. It was at risk. So we're playing out the same dramatic dialectic today. The Roman Empire failed to exterminate Christianity, so they sought to co-opt it. They sought to infiltrate it. They blended pagan belief and practice with a new religion, and they gave it huge standalone churches from the time of Constantine forward, modeled after the pagan temples that the original Christian faith did not have. The original Christian faith, the original Way, in Acts of the Apostle, they met in each other's homes. They had a meal together. They had a dialogue about the faith and their beliefs to better understand that Christ was the Messiah, the source of salvation, so that they could go to the temple courts and they could prove that Christ was the Messiah from the Scriptures by citing examples of his life where he fulfilled all of the prophecies that pointed to him as the Messiah. So these people in the Roman Empire, they superimposed the characteristics of pagan goddesses, such as Cybele, Magna Mater, Isis, Asherah, and others, over Mary, the mother of Christ, and they transformed her in the Queen of Heaven, or Heavenly Mother. They gave the new faith a hierarchy of offices beyond evangelists and bishops, reminiscent of prior pagan religions. And they gave it symbols lifted directly from those pagan religions, and they superimposed those symbols on the architecture and theosophy and practice of Christianity. So if you go to a Catholic church every Mass or once a week in Mass, the point of the Eucharist is for the renewing of your salvation. At a certain point in the Mass, the bell tinkles, and the host and the wine, well, the bread and the wine, which are the host, become the literal body and blood of Christ, and you eat and drink these to the renewing of your salvation. That's what Catholic doctrine and theology teaches. They gave Christians and their converts a factionalism that persists even today. through direct revelation and alternative gospels from angelic revelations that contradicted the original faith as contained in the scriptures. Those factions succeeded in part due to the corruption of the original faith. So you have like one faith after another that is based on direct revelation to its founder. Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is the most clear-cut and most recent example of this. Then you have the false prophecies of the Jehovah's Witnesses in terms of the end of the world. Seventh-day Adventists have the same issue. All of this was based on direct personal revelation. And you know it's false because those prophecies didn't come true. You know it's false because they're preaching another gospel than the one that Paul and the apostles preached to the various local churches in Galatia, in Ephesus, in Corinth, in Thessalonica. All of these gospels, these new gospels, these new faiths rely on angelic revelation that contradicts directly, in most cases, or gives prophecies that don't come to pass in contradiction of the original gospel of Jesus Christ. They add these conditions onto it, such as saving ordinances at the temple. In the case of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they give you the renewing of your salvation through the consumption of the Eucharist, and this mystical mumbo-jumbo whereby the tinkling of a bell signifies that the bread and the wine have become the literal body and blood of Christ, so that you can cannibalize your God. That's what they're doing, is with all of these new innovations. And in the original faith, converts met in each other's houses and argued in the temple squares of their time to prove that Christ was the Messiah. They went directly into enemy territory. They went to synagogues and temples. They went to pagan temples, and they argued from the scriptures of their time, that is the Old Testament, the Torah, the prophets, so on and so forth, to prove that Christ, by virtue of his life and the facts of that life, was in fact the Messiah foretold of in the Old Testament. They gave these heretical breakoffs. They gave us creeds and confessions apart from Scripture, often in contradiction of Scripture. So if you read the Catholic Catechism, it's run through with this. It's the perpetual virginity of Mary, Queen of Heaven. Most people don't realize, outside of Catholicism, that the Immaculate Conception doesn't refer to the conception of Christ through the Holy Spirit, born of a virgin, in fulfillment of Isaiah 7:14. They don't understand that at all. They don't understand Isaiah 9, saying that we will call him Wonderful, Mighty Counselor, God. Because these people sow confusion rather than clarity with all of these multitudinous doctrines. And at the core of the Christian faith is a very simple principle. That is, Christ crucified on the cross is the source of your salvations. He's sent by the Father to reconcile others outside of the Jewish people, from whom the kingdom is passed, according to Christ in Matthew 21. He's sent to allow Gentiles and even Jews who accept him a path to eternal redemption. He is the full final sacrifice, the perfect propitiation for man's sins. It's very simple. Christ died on the cross for you. He died on the cross for me, without regard to your ethnicity, your skin color, or anything else. The covenant is fulfilled in Christ. And Jews lose their special status because of their disobedience, because they killed the prophets, because they rejected Christ as the Son of God. And so the faith that informed its believers that they had to master their desires and conform them to the example of Christ by relying on the power of Christ's grace for the purpose of God in monogamous marriage was corrupted into the familiar tropes of pagan practices, that is, plural marriage, open sexual relationships, or extreme asceticism, whereby one's denial of and abstinence from human nature and desire was once claimed to spiritual advancement or haughtiness, even as it led to most ascetics lapsing into utter sexual depravity or gluttony by subjecting them to increasing temptation through this self-denial that wasn't necessary to their salvation or their spiritual understanding. God designs us for marriage. He designs us to fulfill our sexual desire in marriage. That's clear from Genesis on. A man shall leave his parents and become one flesh with his wife. In Corinthians, it's modeled directly after Christ in the church. That is, a husband shall love his wife and give himself for his wife, as Christ loved and gave himself for the church. And his wife, as his bride, is much like the church, the bride of Christ. The church submits itself to Christ because Christ loved and gave himself for the church. So, ultimately, the Jews are unique in this, in that they do not proselytize. They're not seeking to evangelize to add to their numbers from non-Jews. They seek only to rule and exploit non-Jews who are not fully human under the Talmudic, Zionist, or Kabbalistic belief. That's a distinction that's extremely important to understand here. Only Jews are human. The rest of us are not fully human. We are, as Ezekiel says, we have the flesh of donkeys. We are animalistic from the Jewish perspective, and we exist solely to serve them, to be enslaved by them. In the contemporary world, the Talmudic, Zionist, and Kabbalistic Jew has plenty of divisions among Gentiles to exploit or leverage for their own power and purposes. Gentiles fight each other. The Talmudists, the Zionists, and the Kabbalists exploit this to no end to bring about the conditions that they believe will usher in the Mashiach, or the Messiah, who will be the Christian Antichrist. So, this is AntiTribe, and we're going to review a few examples of how the Talmudic, Zionist, and Kabbalistic dialectic plays out to the benefit of the synagogue of Satan by both sides being played against the middle ground in order to advance what the rest of the world will know as the Antichrist, but what Jews understand will be the arrival of their Jewish Mashiach, their Messiah, again, what we know as the Antichrist. And make no mistake about it, there are multiple Antichrists that have arisen over time in human history. The Mashiach, or the Jewish Messiah, is the Antichrist. So antisemitism is the thinking man's position, not as an ethnically based or grounded perspective, but as a perspective that rejects Talmudic, Zionist, and Kabbalistic ideology and practice, and its offshoots for Gentiles or non-Jews, such as Freemasonry, Islam, as well as the useful pagan or atheistic ideologies that are leveraged by the Talmudists and Zionists and Kabbalists to advance their dominion over non-Jews. God has created every human being in his image, including Jews, and he has endowed every human being with dignity and worth and value, so much so that he sacrificed his only begotten Son, the incarnate Word, for the redemption of all mankind, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of other immutable characteristics such as skin color. So whatever you do to someone on the basis of their immutable characteristics, that which God has endowed them with, from the color of their skin to their biological sex to anything else that they cannot change at the level of their genetics, is done to either honor God or to dishonor God in his sovereignty. If you physically attack another human being, or you seek to oppress them or reduce their humanity and strip them of their personhood on the basis of their immutable characteristics that God in his wisdom has endowed them with, such as their skin color, their biological sex, so on and so forth, you are in open rebellion against God. Ideologies that purport to posit a moral basis for such actions are demonic and evil. They are to be rejected for what they are. Semitism, no matter who carried them out, it is entirely appropriate to defend yourself from those who aggress against you on the basis of your immutable characteristics And it is a form of obedience to the God who created you in his image and who gave you your life. It's entirely appropriate to meet violence with violence to defend yourself and to seek to ensure that if there are martyrs, they should be from the kingdom of demons. And what I am saying to you is that the kingdom of demons includes a good many ideologies that purport to be Christian but actually serve Zionist, Talmudic, or Kabbalistic objectives that are clearly false in terms of prophecies that have not come to pass, in the form of a gospel that contradicts the gospel of the New Testament. And at AntiTribe, we don't encourage pacifism. We don't encourage civil disobedience. We say that everyone has a right to defend themselves against Semitic ideology. In fact, it's necessary because Semitic or satanic ideology will eventually result in physical aggression. It's inevitable. And so we have an obligation to defend ourselves against this ideology and the actions that naturally arise from it, and defend others who suffer against the incursions or aggressions of the synagogue of Satan and its Gentile enablers and toadies. Those who embrace such ideologies should not be in any position to influence public policy, culture, or societal norms or mores. They just should not. They are disqualified by their rejection of common humanity and common values in Christ. If you don't believe that someone is created in the image of God based on their skin color or their sex, or that you are superior to them based on the differences in your immutable characteristics, you are in blasphemy to God. And if you attempt to implement your supremacist ideologies with action or government policies or laws to their detriment, you must be met with force. If you will not surrender the ideologies, you must be obliterated as a threat to the dignity of humanity. If you must fight against this, fight to win. Fight to kill your enemies who seek to appropriate your civic institutions and processes to realize demonic evil ends. This is AntiTribe, the Freakin Weekend. We'll be reviewing recent and past developments as part of a continuum fostered by ethno-supremacist ideologies such as Zionism, Talmudists, and Kabbalists, and their Gentile equivalents in Freemasonry and other factions that purport to be Christian but are not, as well as the useful idiocies of pagan ideology such as the caste system in Hinduism and secular humanism, atheism. We'll also be examining how symbols interplay with this. So this is AntiTribe, the Freakin Weekend, and that concludes the introduction to this episode. Next up, we have Chapter 1 of this episode. That is Nick Fuentes. So we begin with Nick Fuentes, who you see in the upper right-hand corner of my screen. He's a Sephardic Jewish homosexual man masquerading as a traditionalist Christian Catholic anti-Semite. Now, on his show, America First, which you can see on Rumble, Fuentes betrays his true nature with his explicit statements, which are incompatible with Christ and incompatible with the way. Now, in a prior episode, we presented Nick's dalliance with a gay man who dresses up and identifies as a cat boy. So we've laid the foundation for Nick being a deviant. He went on an actual date that was posted on social media in his past, and we're going to review his more recent statements as well as some of Nick's greatest hits in contradictory statements to flesh out our thesis, which is that in this dialectic, in this debate, one of the things that Talmudic or Zionist or Kabbalistic Jews, those are often the same thing, or a blend of those three things. One of the things that they're extraordinarily good at is controlling both sides of the argument and the terms of the argument, and they have useful toys among Goyim and among covert Sephardic Jews like Nick Fuentes, to serve their purposes in this. And so the first clip that I'm going to play you of Nick is a clip in which he argues that Jeffrey Epstein is cool.
Here's the thing. Everybody would say, I would never go, me, Epstein Island, I would never. And it's like, dude, you're telling me Jeffrey Epstein was probably so cool. Like, he was probably the coldest, coolest guy you know. You're telling me the coolest guy you know who knows everybody says, hey, we're going to go on my private jet to my private island. We got hot girls. He doesn't tell you how old they are. How fucking lame would you be? Are they 18? Like, who's going to be the nerd that asks that? You probably would just assume they are. Or that it's in international waters, so it doesn't matter, you know? But like, you're telling me you would automatically say, no. Like, you don't know what's going on. All everybody knew was that he was the coolest guy in town. The coolest guy in town says, hey, I'm rich, private island, private jet, hot girls all week. Let's go. Great food. You're telling me you'd be like, Jeffrey, are they all 18 though? You're telling me you would be the nerd that would ask that? You have the balls to say that? Honestly, that just sounds kind of gay, to be honest with you. Could you imagine you're like, take Epstein out of it for just a second. What if it was like someone you knew in real life and he's like, dude, we got girls. We're going to a party. It's going to be great. And you're like, wait a second. You pull them aside. Can I see their IDs? Like, dude, no one would say that. So you could see, but look, but this is how he entrapped people, because this is how people are.
So that's Nick Fuentes, a Sephardic Jewish man, extolling the virtues of Jeffrey Epstein, a Jewish sexual predator who raped children and adults alike with impunity in service of the Mossad and its auxiliary, the CIA. So let's unpack this. Here, a self-professed virgin who went on a date with a cat boy who was clearly gay in the viral video now extolling the virtues of another Jewish man who trafficked girls all over the world to sexually compromise businessmen and celebrities and politicians on behalf of the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, as well as its auxiliary or subordinate information, the CIA, which also serves Zionist ends. Now, Nick Fuentes, whose every proclamation is seized upon by Jewish liberals to justify hate speech laws and a tightening of the regulation against freedom of association and expression, is a walking, talking series of contradictions. He's a Sephardic Jew whose family converted to Catholicism. He was raised Catholic. To wit, he says that a sex trafficker and a rapist is cool and having sex with women is gay. That's the next clip that we've got to pull up for you. So one of the things that you have to understand here is that you can't separate somebody like Fuentes and Epstein from the values that produce them. That is Zionism, that is Talmudic Judaism. You can't separate them from that, because in the Talmud it says you can be betrothed to a 3-year and 1-day-old girl through sexual intercourse. And if you have sex with a child who's younger than that, it's likened to poking a thumb in someone's eye. That's the Talmudic Jewish view of sexuality. That's the Talmudic Jewish view of pedophilia, is that you can marry a 3-year and 1-day-old girl. Now, the reason they can't be unfettered in the present day about that they can't say that that's their belief system, it isn't because they've evolved. It's because publicly the optics are such that they would get obliterated for saying that out loud. They would be destroyed. Outrage against such positions would be immediate. And one of the things that Zionist and Talmudic and Kabbalist Jews really resent is having to conform their core beliefs to norms and mores outside of their ethnicity. That is, norms and mores that are defined by the world at large, as opposed to norms and mores that are defined by fellow Jews. Make no mistake about it, if the Jews were able to define themselves, if Talmudic and Zionist and Kabbalistic Jews were able to define for themselves what their norms and mores were, apart from what the rest of us thought, they're under 15 million people in a world of over 8 billion. If they had dominion over us, and if they could, they would. Because their Talmud is rabbinical dialogue on sexuality and sexual mores and sexual practices, and so therefore a man of indeterminate age, of any age, can be betrothed to a girl who is 3 years and 1 day old. And you can't separate that value system, those norms and those mores, from someone like Jeffrey Epstein. As we go on, we're going to see that Nick Fuentes in the past has said that he would prefer, as a 30-year-old man, he's not yet 30, to marry a 16-year-old girl. Now, that's illegal in most instances. There are states that you can go marry a 14-year-old, such as Idaho, and that's part of the problem in our pedophilic culture, is that you can actually do that. Part of the problem is that ephebophiles and hebophiles get a free pass to molest people who are legally children and to exploit them for their own sexual gratification. And so you have a weakening of statutory rape laws, or you just don't have those things enforced at all. The fact that it's statutory rape as opposed to child rape is its own set of problems. But here's Nick Fuentes, and in this clip he explicitly says that Jeffrey Epstein was probably the coolest guy. And who's really going to check the IDs of the women that he's offering? Most of us would be able to tell that a 14-year-old is not of age. Most of us of a certain value system, that is Christians, even some people who are outside of Christianity and who don't believe in Christ, would think that it is wrong, and perhaps not legally wrong, but morally wrong, and also just inappropriate to have sex with an 18-year-old when you're 40. Most of us would draw that line for ourselves. But of course, according to Nick Fuentes, most of us wouldn't. And that's how Jeffrey Epstein manipulated people. And of course, among the people that Jeffrey Epstein targeted, their value system is one of power. He targeted other Jews, such as Leon Black of Apollo and others. There was a Barclays executive that had to resign. There was Prince Andrew. I don't know how familiar you are with the English monarchy and what it purportedly believes and practices behind the scenes. But ultimately, what Jeffrey Epstein, the people that Jeffrey Epstein targeted, were people in positions of influence or power, but also people whose value systems made them susceptible to what he was offering them in the way of children to have sex with. And he offered them that in the context of, hey, you're safe here to indulge whatever desire you like, whatever prurient interest you have, you can indulge here safely. And of course, I'll have these hidden cameras recording you for leverage later. And so in the case of Leon Black, he paid upwards of $170 million to Jeffrey Epstein, purportedly for tax advice. And of course, in the case of Lex Wexner, chairman of Limited Brands and founder of Victoria's Secret, as we know it today, Les Wexner gave him a townhouse or a home in New York worth tens of millions of dollars for $10. Gave him that townhouse for very little consideration. And of course, Wexner, being a Zionist, involved in intelligence operations out of Columbus, Ohio, participated with Jeffrey Epstein in what he saw as beneficial to the state of Israel. And again, you can't separate the cultural norms that arise from a series of rabbinical teachings known as the Talmud. You can't separate that out from what these people actually do. And that's kind of the problem, is their ideology renders them fundamentally incompatible with the wider norms of the world, especially the West, and especially Christianity. And so what you see is someone like Nick Fuentes saying Jeffrey Epstein was probably cool. Now, the Christian position on this is very clear. You can't have sex outside of wedlock. The Christian position is also clear that you will never be tempted beyond what you are able. That is in 1 Corinthians 10. And that with every temptation, 1 Corinthians 10:13, there is a means of escape. So the bargain that God makes with you is that you're not going to be tempted beyond what you're able to withstand. So you don't really have any excuse for failing to resist someone like Jeffrey Epstein. Because with every temptation comes the means of escape, and there is no temptation that you'll be subjected to that is beyond what you are able to withstand. That's very clear in 1 Corinthians 10. So the Christian position on this is clear. You'd be able to resist it if you're truly Christian, and more than that, you'd have no excuse if you didn't. You know them by their fruits. That's a recurring theme in Christianity. All sexual sin, fornication, is unique in that it's the sin that takes place inside of the body. All other sins take place outside of the body, according to Corinthians. Now, you have Nick Fuentes, who is held up as this sort of piñata, this target of white male supremacy and white male depravity, for saying these outrageous things like Jeffrey Epstein was probably the coolest guy and every single one of you would have been manipulated by him and compromised by him and what he was offering. You're not going to check the IDs of a girl who's 12 to 14 to 16 years of age. You're going to go along to get along, and why not? You're going to have sex with them. I mean, after all, what Nick says about his ideal woman in terms of marriage material is that she's young, she's fertile, she's 16. That's the number that he puts on it. And he goes on to say that the fact that he has not dated anyone beyond this cat boy that he went on a recorded date with, so that's a lie that Nick Fuentes tells, that he's never been on a date, he's never dated anybody. He's been on a date, at least one that we know of, with a cat boy, another man. According to him, like, his virginity and his failure to date women or form relationships with them is proof of his heterosexuality, his involuntarily celibate lifestyle, or his voluntarily celibate lifestyle, because he does make it seem like it's volitional, is proof of his heterosexuality, because having sex with women is gay. That's literally something that Nick Fuentes says, and we're going to show you that in the next clip.
What, people calling me gay because I've never had a girlfriend? I think if anything, it makes me less gay. If anything, it makes me not gay. As opposed to less gay. Not that there's any gay, but it makes me not gay. Well, because think about it this way. You know, gay people do date girls all the time. Real. And when I said on Elijah Schaefer's show, when they said, have you ever been in a romantic relationship? Have you ever had sex with a girl? And I said, no. If you name searched me on Twitter, as I always do, all these gay people are coming out and saying, I've had more girlfriends than Nick. I've had sex with more girls than Nick. So like I said last week, not only is that thinking flawed, but actually it's the reverse. That actually makes me really more heterosexual than anybody. If we're really being honest, never having a girlfriend never having sex with a woman really makes you more heterosexual. Because honestly, dating women is gay. Having sex with women is gay. And having sex with men is gay. And you know, it's all gay. And if you want to know the truth, the only really straight heterosexual position is to be an asexual incel. That's it. So that's all there is. Being a MGTOW asexual incel is really the straightest position that you can have. Having sex in itself is gay, I think. I think that it's really a gay act to begin with. Think about it this way. What's gayer than being like, I need cuddles, I need kisses, I need the... It's all very sus to me, you know. I need to spend time with a woman. That's a little sus.
And so there you have it. Spending time with a woman is gay and suspect. It leads you to undergo suspicion, at least in the mind of Nick Fuentes, a 27, 28-year-old man who, by his own admission, has never had sex with a woman. He says that he's not dating women, but the truth is that's because he dated a man. He dated the cat boy. In another clip that has become something of canon in internet lore about Nick Fuentes, he says that as a 30-year-old man, he hopes to marry a 16-year-old. And then he goes on to say in another clip that while Hitler may have been a pedophile and a pagan, he was also really fucking cool. That's a verbatim clip here, which I'm about to play you in a moment.
Hitler was a pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really fucking cool.
You regret saying that?
Saying a fact? No.
So, there you have it. According to Nick Fuentes, who is a purportedly practicing Catholic of Sephardic Jewish descent, Hitler was really fucking cool. He was also a pagan and a pedophile, but hey, let's not let things go too far astray in terms of Nick Fuentes and Adolf Hitler. I mean, here's the reality of Nick Fuentes. He's a 27-year-old with a Sephardic Jewish father. He's of Sephardic Jewish descent. And his every statement is seized upon by Zionists, Talmudists, Kabbalists, and their Goyim enablers to rationalize hate speech laws and speech codes, who he openly refuses to embrace the very traditional values that he purportedly advocates in his diatribes. He is unmarried. He's celibate or asexual. He advocates for marrying 16-year-old girls. He extols the virtues of Jewish sex traffickers and the most infamous genocidal leader of the 20th century. He openly espouses neoconservatism in terms of America's foreign policy. That is, interventionist, Zionist foreign policy positions for the United States that rationalize invasion and constant interference in the affairs of foreign countries and foreign governments by the Trump administration. Some notable examples that he supported is the Trump administration's policy in Venezuela, and he also openly endorses taking Greenland by force. So he's emblematic of the reality that Zionist and Talmudic and Kabbalistic Jews control both sides of the debate, because he's a useful piñata in many respects. I mean, the things that he says are outrageous and shocking to most people. So on the one hand, the Zionist can take full advantage of white and Jewish liberals who are outraged to support the narrowing of free speech rights for the rest of us, because people like Nick Fuentes say outrageous things. like Hitler was cool, even though he was a pedophile and a pagan. And ultimately, he gets them to advocate for the liberal policies and ideologies that he claims to oppose. On the other hand, he serves as low-hanging fruit for their positions with his Holocaust denial, his blatant advocacy of ephebophilia, his constantly provocative anti-Semitic rhetoric, even though Fuentes himself is ethnically Jewish. The Jews have deplatformed and canceled and replatformed and uncanceled and otherwise aided and abetted Nick Fuentes throughout his career. So when Elon Musk brought Twitter, Elon, of course, is a Jewish South African, he gave Fuentes a path back to Twitter. The truth is that Jews can't eliminate anti-Semitism, so they co-opt it with the likes of Nick Fuentes. Millions of unthinking Goyim boys and men lap up Nick Fuentes' rhetoric without ever once considering why Nick Fuentes is allowed to say or do the things that he says and does. So Fuentes fans don't consider which masters he actually serves with his performance. This brings us to recent events in Miami, like where Fuentes was filmed at a nightclub with other influencers such as Andrew and Tristan Tate, Islamic influencers, Stiko and Myron Gaines. And to be clear, Andrew Tate claims to have converted to Islam himself, and a man who calls himself clavicular, who is something called a look-smaxer. The Tates brought one of their hangers on. That would be Justin Waller of Red Iron Construction, who's also in the Manosphere space. And there were various Instagram models who served as ornaments in the footage from the night, which was filmed, and yet totally organic and spontaneous. Not at all performative, not at all staged. Everything that you see is spontaneous and organic in the footage that has emerged from that night. So in one of the clips, the assembled influencers are in a nightclub in Miami Beach, Verdum, and they request that the DJ plays Kanye West, Heil Hitler, which, by the way, they played on the party bus that they chartered for that night as well. So as the camera pans, we see Andrew Tate smiling and the other influencers dancing and mouthing the words to the song as it plays. Some of them are giving the Heil Hitler salute. Others are just dancing. But this took place in a club in Miami Beach, where the police are accosting private citizens over their purportedly anti-Semitic social media posts. And that's not the only jurisdiction where the police are doing this. There's footage of this happening in Texas as well. But they're doing it at the behest of the municipality's Jewish mayor, Stephen Miner. Whenever someone questions him, of course, he plays the race and ethnicity card, the anti-Semitic card. So I'm going to play you a clip of what happened to someone who ran for Miami city government and who posted something completely innocuous on social media. It made the news, both locally and nationally, because of how outrageous it was to send the police to this woman's house to basically interrogate her for exercising her First Amendment rights on social media.
A Miami Beach woman says she is outraged after police showed up at her door. They had questions for former political candidate Raquel Pacheco. They were asking about a Facebook post that she made criticizing Miami Beach's mayor. CBS News Miami's Abby Dodge is your reporter in Miami Beach tonight. Abby, what was in this post that prompted officers to show up and knock on her door like that?
Well, Raquel Pacheco wrote a critical comment about the mayor after he posted a photo saying that the city was welcoming to everyone. She didn't expect then that her comment would lead to a police investigation.
Am I being charged with the crime? Okay, so you're here to investigate a statement that I allegedly made on Facebook.
Raquel Pacheco, a former candidate for Miami Beach City Commission and Florida Senate, started recording when officers showed up at her door Monday. She says she's still emotionally distraught about what happened next.
My overwhelming feeling was that freedom of speech as I know it died at my front step yesterday. And that was just such an incredibly sad. It still makes me sad. It's an incredibly, incredibly sad thing.
Is that your account?
I refuse to answer questions without my lawyer present.
Officers then read Pacheco's Facebook comment. She says in part, the guy who consistently calls for the death of Palestinians tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ community in any way. Officers then explained why they came to her door.
We're just trying to prevent somebody else getting agitated or agreeing with the statement. We're not saying it's true or not.
Anyone who reads that statement, I don't know how you can take that as an incitement to violence of any type.
I called the mayor's communications staff multiple times and stopped by City Hall. The mayor's office did not provide anyone to speak with me and said the mayor was not in the building. Pacheco has hired a lawyer and together they made public information requests. She says she wants to know what led up to the officers at her door.
We're traveling down a very, very slippery road here, and my goal here is not just to make it stop for me, obviously, but it's for everyone. Because think about this, I'm a vocal person, I'm a loud person, I'm a well-known person in this town. If they can do that to me, and I'm a veteran, if they can do that to me, imagine what they can do to people that don't have a voice and don't have a presence and visibility.
In just minutes before our newscast, we did end up hearing from the mayor's office through a statement. They called this interaction a police matter. We also recently heard back from the Miami Beach Police Department about the investigative unit officers who did show up to Pacheco's house. They said in a statement, and I'm going to read it for you now, that the Miami Beach Police Department was made aware of a social post containing potentially inflammatory commentary referencing a Miami Beach elected official. In light of recent national concerns regarding antisemitism and out of an abundance of caution, the department assessed the post for any potential safety implications. They did say that detectives found no immediate threat. Live from Miami Beach, Abby Dodge, CBS News, Miami.
And so there you have it. A former political candidate for Miami's city government ultimately found herself on the receiving end of a police visit, clearly intended to intimidate her for exercising her right to free speech and criticizing the state of Israel's policies when it came to Gaza in the aftermath of October 7th. And, of course, this woman was also criticizing her city government and its hypocritical stance on that issue as she saw it, as well as the mayor's failure to do enough in the eyes of that woman for the LGBTQIA community in Miami. So ultimately, what we have in the United States of America, where our freedom of speech and freedom of expression are constitutionally enshrined in the First Amendment, which has been incorporated to the states, we have the police showing up out of an abundance of caution, they say, to intimidate a woman who has ultimately exercised that right of free speech. If you looked at the actual post, there's nothing about it that could be perceived as a threat, unless, of course, you're a sensitive penis Zionist like Stephen Miner, the mayor of Miami Beach. And so the police were dispatched out of an abundance of caution. They didn't identify any immediate safety threat because the post itself was innocuous. It's standard operating procedure for liberals and leftists who find themselves dissatisfied with their Zionist local and state government officials, as well as their federal elected officials and bureaucrats. Ultimately, this woman's crime was that she ran afoul of Zionism, which is absolute. The state of Israel has an absolute right to exist. The State of Israel has an absolute right to defend itself by killing Palestinian civilians, not Hamas, but Palestinian civilians in Gaza, who, quite frankly, are subjected to the same brutal treatment by Hamas that they are subjected to by the IDF and the Israeli government. And so, of course, the Miami police showed up to her doorstep for speaking out against this, because if you criticize Zionist policies, you are effectively anti-Semitic, you're anti-Jewish, and you're racist if you speak out against these policies. Because Zionism is absolute, and it demands absolute fealty from others as it pertains to the State of Israel and its policies and its practices. And so, clearly, if you speak out against this, if you speak out against the overreach in the apartheid State of Israel, you are anti-Semitic and you want all Jews to be exterminated, so on and so forth, blah, blah. We've all heard the tropes. We've all heard the faux outrage. And one of the things that stands out about not just that, the speech police, which is what the local law enforcement are being turned into as it pertains to Zionism, Talmudic Judaism, Kabbalism, is that the influencers in the video were widely identified throughout the mainstream media as white nationalists, and they were anything but white. So the Tate brothers are biracial. They have a black father, a white mother. Myron Gaines is a black man who is Muslim. Nick Fuentes is a Sephardic Jew whose family converted to Catholicism, like a lot of other Sephardic Jews in Spain. And they raised him as a Catholic. And Sneeko is of Haitian and Filipino and Jewish descent through his father. And he converted to Islam in 2023. As traditionally understood, none of these men would fit within the white nationalist or white supremacist movements due to their status as biracial, multi-ethnic, and or their Islamic affiliations and viewpoints. Nevertheless, because they pander via Nazi tropes, they are held up as emblematic of a white nationalist movement. Miami Mayor Stephen Miner and other Jewish community groups were only too happy to cite the actions of a Sephardic Jewish troll and 3 Muslims who are biracial and multi-ethnic as somehow emblematic of white nationalism. And that brings me to our second chapter, because one of those biracial Muslims who were present was none other than Andrew Tate. And so I'm going to unpack his participation in that video at the Miami nightclub, as well as his later appearance on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, in which he tried to explain himself, only to reveal something rather significant about his business and his partnerships that directly undermines the narrative being advanced by the mainstream media as it pertains to this. And it's consistent with a lot of other things that we're going to see, especially some of the issues with Alex Jones. But I want to reiterate the thesis of this podcast, which is that Zionists, Talmudic Jews, Kabbalists, they control both sides of the argument. They control the terms of the argument. And so here you have a bunch of biracial and multi-ethnic individuals, and they are held up as white nationalists, emblematic of white supremacy, because they played a song by a black man entitled Heil Hitler. And therefore we're all supposed to believe that there's an anti-Semitic crisis, as opposed to a stage-managed, performative outrage porn. Like, it's rage bait. That's all it is. And it was rather successful because all of the usual suspects came out against it. That is, the Zionist Jews came out against it. The Zionist Christians came out against it. The reality of it is it had nothing to do with white nationalism. None of the individuals involved are really white at all. In fact, they are useful idiots for Zionists, for Talmudic Jews, for Kabbalistic Jews, and for their enablers who purport to be both Zionist and Christian, which is one of the greatest oxymorons of the 20th and 21st century. That makes no sense whatsoever, because what Zionism and Talmudic Judaism posit is that Christ is being boiled in excrement in hell for blasphemy against the Hebrew sages. So none of this makes any sense outside of the context of a stage-managed argument in which both sides are controlled and directed towards the middle, that is, both sides against the middle, which is the central thesis of this entire podcast. It's the central thesis of this entire episode, which is that these individuals stage manage the ascendancy of these influencers, because every single one of them exists on a platform that is owned, operated, and controlled by Zionist interest. Every single one of them somehow gets their content out on platforms that are known for policing anti-Semitic speech. So as we delve into Andrew Tate's role in this, he is both American and British. He's both black and white. His father, Emory Tate, a black American, who Andrew Tate claims worked for the CIA. You can't make any of this up, but Tate's mother is a white British woman. And because their father and mother split up, Andrew and his brother Tristan grew up on a council estate in Luton, England, in the United Kingdom. That's akin to a Section 8 housing project in the United States. And so the Tate brothers found some notoriety in kickboxing. Later, they built their first fortune in pornography via a cam girl business. And afterwards, they became online influencers in the manosphere, expounding a mixture of pro-masculine messaging infused with an entrepreneurial bent. They want you to start a business, and they also want you to dominate women. They want you to accumulate a bunch of women. It's a hypergamic ideology. It's certainly anything but traditional in its outlook. You know, they advocate for traditional roles for women, sure. But they also advocate for polyamory and hypergamy. That is, men who are influential, who have status, who have wealth, accumulate and breed with as many attractive women as possible. And of course, Andrew Tate's outlook on those women is very similar to that expressed by Nick Fuentes. The younger they are, the less sexually experienced they are, the more attractive they are to Andrew Tate, because he can teach them what he likes sexually. He can teach them to conform to his views, in his outlooks, in his philosophy about what a woman's role is. Because they don't know any better. They're 18, 19 years old. They're virgins. They don't have any sexual experience, and they don't have any life experience. And so in the aftermath of this night out in Miami, there was a backlash in the mainstream media because the night out culminated in Kanye West, a black rapper's song Heil Hitler being played. And so Andrew Tate went on a Jewish podcaster and businessman's Patrick Bet-David's show to disavow his fellow influencers and to distance himself from what he said they did. And so I'm going to play you the clip from that appearance on Patrick Bet-David's show.
besides say, oh, I've never met you before, you haven't been vetted, I'm never going to meet anybody ever. Or sit in a car and say, sorry guys, because I'm in this car, we must cut off the Bluetooth. Let me take everybody's phone from them. Like, it is what it is. I understand how these things get attached to my name. It's very inconvenient for me. I have Jewish business partners. I have tech teams in Israel. I have things going on, and I get a mess from this crap too. I can argue that I was set up. I can argue that Sneeko wasn't thinking. I can argue that they were just trying to chase clicks. I could argue it was malicious or not malicious. But truthfully, from the bottom of my heart, truthfully, I'm not here to beg sorry from anybody.
And so there you have it. He's not there to beg sorry from anybody. He can't be held accountable for what people around him do. Like, what's he going to do? Confiscate everybody's phone, say that they haven't been vetted, all of that sort of thing. I mean, that's unfair to Andrew Tate. The truth is, at the end of the day, the most relevant part of that clip was, I have Jewish business partners. That's Andrew Tate. Two of those Jewish business partners and associates were with him that night when Kanye West's song Heil Hitler was played in that club, Benom. Their names were Nick Fuentes and Sneeko, because in the end, both sides are played against the middle. The Zionist, Talmudic, Kabbalistic, Jewish community doesn't have to discuss or defend their rampant anti-white bigotry, their anti-Christian rhetoric, saying that Christ is boiling in shit in hell, their belief to that end that Gentiles are subhuman, or the genocidal apartheid policies of the Israeli state. Instead, we're talking about a song in a nightclub played by an influencer who is partly of Jewish descent. That's Sneeko. He's the one who was attributed, like he was the one that the request was attributed to. And he and others in his entourage who were not white were held up by the media and the Jewish community as white nationalists, white supremacists. And none of these people are white. Two of them are arguably Jewish, at least ethnically. So Andrew Tate espouses traditional values and roles for men and women on the one hand, preaching personal responsibility and high achievement for men. But his first successful business venture was in pornography, which is corrosive to traditional values and morals, and which, if you were to read what Jews say about pornography as a means of eroding Gentile values, that is, Christian values, you would understand how radioactive that idea is. So his business foundation is in porn. So how is it that a purported anti-Semitic and allegedly misogynistic individual like Andrew Tate rose with such a meteoric ascent to the pinnacle of social media and cultural influence? I remember one day just flipping on my phone and seeing his videos. And before, I had no idea who he was. Do you think that his ascent was entirely organic? Or do you think that perhaps all of these individuals that I've listed here are part of a both sides against the middle strategy on Jewish owned and controlled platforms that police anti-Semitic speech routinely? Do you think that all the canceling and deplatforming and replatforming and uncanceling on platforms created, maintained, owned, operated, and controlled by Jews is accidental? Do you think it's a product of organic chance and happenstance? I don't. I mean, you have to give the goyim a game, as Maurice Samuel said. And the game is trolling and antagonism and provocation and manageable anti-Semitism with controlled opposition. It's a Jewish boy like Sneeko playing Heil Hitler in Vendome while LARPing as a Muslim, only to have Andrew Tate going on Jewish podcaster Patrick David's show and denouncing such antics after the fact. So what does Andrew Tate promote, really? He promotes materialism. He promotes crash commercialism. He mixes it with entrepreneurship via his multi-level marketing scheme whereby disaffected young men buy and sell the real world subscriptions. Because if you sign someone up for the real world, that's his online platform, you receive a portion of their revenue. And so he promotes promiscuity, whereby women are objects for his sexual gratification in a hypergamy-focused world that he decries, even as he profits from the same world in the same system. It's a game that is leveraged by Jewish social liberals and financial interests to gain more control over what we say, think, and do, all with an idea towards towards realizing a God world as articulated in Zionist, Talmudic, and Kabbalistic thoughts and ideology, where under 16 million Jews rule over 8.3 billion people. That's the goal anyway. And so what I want to say to everybody watching this is, do you think that it's accidental that in the last year or so you've seen this explosion of anti-Semitic speech on social media platforms, where previously your account would get suspended, you get canceled? Do you think it's accidental? Or do you think the people who control those platforms are letting that speech through? Like, at the end of the day, I'm asking the question of you. I'd like to hear what you think in the comments section. And that brings us to our final figure, Alex Jones, the OG conspiracy theorist, founder of InfoWars, who got himself into a lot of trouble because he said that the Sandy Hook shooting was a false flag, that it was staged, that the people involved in it were crisis actors, that those children really weren't shot. And so he was on the receiving end of a defamation judgment for over $1 billion. I think it was $1.3 billion was the judgment. That has effectively bankrupted him. It's resulted in his company's assets being sold at a bankruptcy auction, which he's currently challenging. The satirical news outlet, The Onion, purportedly bought those assets out of bankruptcy, but he challenged the sale and the terms of the sale successfully with a bankruptcy judge, and now a company affiliated with Alex Jones, stunning I know, is offering double what The Onion offered for those same assets. So ultimately, it looks like InfoWars and its assets will wind up back in the control of Alex Jones. And his debts, including that judgment, will probably be discharged in bankruptcy. So I'm going to play you a clip of Alex Jones that pretty much sums up just how anti-Zionist and how anti-Semitic he truly is. And I want you to understand that this man has said plenty of things about the Jewish mafia, Jewish control over the financial system, the entertainment system, and the culture of Goyim or Gentiles in the West. He said plenty of things like that, but when it came down to brass tacks, this is what he had to say about someone who was truly anti-Semitic.
The Jews, Mr. Jones, have inflicted tremendous harm upon the United States.
Well, let me ask you a question. From your perspective, should the Jews be gotten rid of?
Yes, they should. In every country...
All right, I'm going to stop you right there. I am Jewish.
Well, that certainly speaks for itself, doesn't it? Here you have Alex Jones confronted with somebody who he asks the question, and the guy answers. He says, do you think the Jews should be gotten rid of? And the guy says, I do. And Alex Jones says, I'm going to stop you right there. I am Jewish. I mean, over a 40-year career, Alex Jones has established himself as a prominent conspiracy theorist who tells just enough of the truth about the government's malfeasance and the elite's conspiracies against the rest of us to come across as credible. But when he encounters true malevolence in the form of an actual anti-Semite who wants Jews to be gotten rid of, he reverts to bootlicking by declaring himself to be a Jew. This is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of Zionist, Talmudist, Kabbalist, controlling both sides of the argument. Now, you really, as someone who's anti-ethno supremacy in general, what I would say to you is you can't target an ethnic Jew for being an ethnic Jew. But you can and should speak out against Zionism, Talmudic Judaism, and Kabbalism for what they are, which is they are forms of ethno-supremacist ideology. And you should ask yourself the critical question here. What exactly has Alex Jones done to change any of the realities of our time? What has he done beyond telling us what's perfectly obvious? Like, every bit of Jones's anti-Semitism doesn't change the fact that he's a useful piñata. He's low-hanging fruit for Semitic interests that seek to regulate speech, deflatform speech that Zionists, Talmudists, and Kabbalists don't like or exploit to their advantage. In the end, Jones set quite the ignominious precedent. I mentioned that earlier. When his claims about Sandy Hook in the school shooting at Sandy Hook were a false flag that resulted in a $1.5 billion, I stand corrected, $1.5 billion judgment for defamation against him and his company InfoWars. That's exactly the kind of legal precedent Zionists and their sympathizers want. A speech-chilling, speech-limiting, autocratic bit of jurisprudence that permits lawfare to triumph over freedom of speech. Alex Jones did that. That whole process, like when I watched it happen, I thought there's no way he's going to lose this case. And then he somehow lost it. And then I thought there's no way that he's ever going to pay this judgment and get out from under what happened. The sale of his company, InfoWars, and its assets in bankruptcy was overturned by the bankruptcy judge. And now a company affiliated with Alex Jones is offering double the price that the Onion was offering for those same assets. And so the sale was set aside. There were problems with the bidding process. And now it looks like Alex Jones is going to take control of InfoWars again. And the judgment, the debt that he has associated with that $1.5 billion judgment are likely to be discharged in bankruptcy. And so we're right back where we started. It's a stage-managed theatrical production, both sides against the middle. And one of the things that you notice about Alex Jones is he screeched and squawked for over 4 decades that the elites want to destroy our lives, our freedoms, and our rights. They want to enslave us. They want to erase us, and they want to subjugate us to their agenda. All of this is perfectly obvious to anyone who reads what the elites promote in their writings, or hears the plain language of elites at the World Economic Forum and elsewhere. I mean, all you have to do is Google the name Yuval Harari, I believe his name is. He argues for depopulation and globalism. He argues for the limiting and curbing of human rights and human freedoms to that end. And so Jones has mixed in the truth about elite corruption with plainly anti-Semitic rhetoric that's seized upon by Zionists, by Talmudists, by Kabbalists to justify increased regulation of speech by the government, setting a precedent in a civil judgment in terms of defamation for a public figure. And all of these interests, they serve these Zionists, all of this serves the interest of Zionists, Talmudists, Kabbalists, and corporate-owned social media platforms. Because they can cite a $1.5 billion judgment to use that to censor speech on their platforms. We don't want to get sued. And so the idea here that Jews, or these Jews, Zionists, Kabbalists, Talmudists, they don't control the media, they don't limit speech. It's a joke. It's absolutely satirical at this point to say that they don't, because it's clearly what has happened here. When you have a private citizen having the Miami Beach police show up on their doorstep over a social media post criticizing Israel's policies and the mayor of Miami Beach's reaction to it, or lack of a reaction to it, we live in a very different world than the one that we thought we lived in. And so I'm going to have some concluding thoughts next, but I first want to play you this SNL clip of Norm Macdonald on SNL's Weekend Update to drive home the point of what I'm talking about, to drive home the fact that it's been common knowledge that these ideologues who are of Jewish ethnicity, who believe in Jewish supremacy, play both sides against the middle to accomplish their goals. And anti-Semitism, these anti-Semitic influencers, or these purportedly anti-Semitic influencers, are either useful idiots or direct tools being used by these groups to accomplish their goals, which is to limit speech, to intimidate everyone else who might speak out against Zionism, Talmudic belief and practice, Kabbalistic belief and practice, because you see what happens to the Tates and the guys like Nick Fuentes and Sneeko and Myron Gaines and so on and so forth when they get deplatformed and canceled. And so maybe you'll be a little more hesitant to speak out against these things. Right now it's easy because for some reason there's been an explosion of anti-Semitic speech out in the open, and I think we all need to take a moment to realize that's not accidental. The people who control those platforms open the floodgates for a reason. And the reason, quite simply, the most obvious reason, is that they're documenting everything that we say and everything that we do online and building profiles of the people who have or who harbor opinions or beliefs that they find objectionable. Opinions or beliefs or values that will undermine their ultimate objectives, which is to suppress any speech critical of Israel, any speech critical of Zionism, any speech critical of Talmudic or Kabbalistic belief and practice. All of the guys to criticize any of those things, any of those behaviors, any of those beliefs, is also to criticize Jews as an entire monolithic ethnicity. That if you're bigoted against those ideas and those practices and the behaviors that arise from them, you're also bigoted against Jews as an ethnicity, as an immutable characteristic. That's clearly bullshit, but that's the goal here. That's the end game. And the end game is also to bring about the conditions for the arrival of their Mashiach, who is, quite frankly, the Christian Antichrist. So I'm going to play you this Norm Macdonald clip, and I'll be back with some concluding thoughts.
Well, earlier this week, actor Marlon Brando met with Jewish leaders to apologize for comments he made on Larry King Live. Among them that, quote, Hollywood is run by Jews. The Jewish leaders accepted the actor's apology and announced that Brando is now free to work again.
That clip encapsulates everything about Hollywood. We all know that they run Hollywood as a cultural center. Our television shows, our movies, our entertainment, the executives of the companies that produce all of that material are Jewish. The executives and founders of Google, Jewish. The executive and the chief executive officer and founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, Jewish. The president of Harvard, when Zuckerberg allegedly stole the basic idea behind Facebook. Larry Summers, Jewish. It goes on and on and on. And I could outline dozens of other examples. But the central thesis of this episode is that even the anti-Semitic influencers, as you see, who, we all see the theater of their deplatforming and cancellation, and they magically reemerge on these platforms, given a second, a third, and a fourth chance, so that they can flush out other anti-Semitic sympathizers into the open, and then afterwards they get to claim plausible deniability, which is, Andrew Tate going on Patrick Bet-David's show and saying, I have Jewish business partners. He's always had Jewish business partners. How do you think he got to the prominent position that he's in? How do you think he got on these platforms? How do you think he suddenly emerged out of nowhere to become the most infamous, misogynist on the planet? How do you think that happened? You think it was organic? You think it was spontaneous? You think that his disaffected manosphere followers suddenly organically coalesced around him and his messaging and elevated him to the top of the search algorithms for all of these platforms like YouTube and Rumble and Google and so on and so forth? You think that really happened organically? Or do you think that maybe his Jewish business partners who have marketed filth and pornography to the Goyim for decades had something to do with that? I tend to think it's the latter. And I think that this entire facade, this entire little dramatization that played out in Miami Beach over a couple of weeks ago, with Sneeko and Nick Fuentes and Myron Gaines and Andrew and Tristan Tate and this clavicular character and Justin Waller, I think that was entirely staged. I think that you're starting to see the emergence of what Semitic people, that is Zionist, Talmudist, and Kabbalist, are doing to address this rising tide of anti-Semitism. And the way that they're doing it is Andrew Tate clearly disavowed the rest of the people he was there with, even though a simple Google search would have revealed that all of them, Myron Gaines, Sneeko, all of them have a history. Nick Fuentes also has a history of anti-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Semitic advocacy. So the reality of it is there's no way he didn't know when he went to that club. He doesn't have his head on a rock. He knows who these people are. And if he didn't, well, he did. Let's be real here. And so the central theme here is that while the Goyim lap it up, they play right into the hands of the Zionists and the Talmudists and the Kabbalists, because on a certain level, they don't have anything original to add to these tropes or cliches that are being bandied about. There's nothing new or innovative about the anti-Semitism that's being marketed to the Goyim, many of whom lack critical thinking skills, who don't analyze what it is that they're consuming with logic and rational thought. They just seize on it because, hey, fuck the Jews. They don't distinguish between an ethnic Jew who may or may not subscribe to any of these ideologies, Zionism, Talmudism, Kabbalism, so on and so forth. They just latch on to the idea of the entire Jewish ethnicity as a monolith. And of course, Zionists and Talmudists and Kabbalists are eager to seize on that in order to justify the regulation of speech, the regulation of activity. Prior episodes of AntiTribe in which we have examined the ADL's efforts to identify speech online, to engage in lawfare with the lawyers that they apparently have on speed dial in order to litigate people who say things that they don't like in a bankruptcy or insolvency. The fact that the ADL claims to train 40,000 law enforcement officers a year, the implications of that are chilling for free speech. And you see that in the clip from Miami Beach that I played, where that woman was accosted by the police. They came to her house over a social media post that did not call for violence, that did not call for any sort of Jew bashing whatsoever. It simply questioned the policies of Gaza and the mayor of Miami Beach's lack of a reaction to what is arguably a genocide in Gaza, what is arguably an ethnic cleansing. This so-called Board of Peace that's going to turn Gaza apparently into a resort town. And then magically, the Zionist government of Israel is going to gain access to those offshore natural gas reserves that are potentially worth trillions. And, of course, the mayor of Miami Beach probably didn't like the fact that he was being called out for his inaction on LGBTQIA issues either. Here's somebody who's hammering him from the left on Gaza, on gay rights, and what happens? The police get dispatched because any criticism of a Jew is automatically anti-Semitic, potentially violent, potentially a call or an incitement to violence. That's the reality of the world in which we live, and it's increasingly a world fashioned by Zionists and Talmudists and Kabbalists who control both sides of the debate and who control the terms of the argument. And they're the ones deploying these individuals like Nick Fuentes, like Andrew and Tristan Tate, Sneeko, Myron Gaines. Do you think that these individuals wind up on social media platforms that are overwhelmingly controlled and censored and policed by Zionists and Talmudists and Kabbalists? Do you think that they just wind up on those platforms to say these things by happenstance? That there's just this overwhelming groundswell of support for them that organically jets them to the top of the search algorithms and the metrics on those sites and those platforms to where they're more viewed and they generate more exposure? And the answer is no. It's very simple. They are there for a reason, and it is to provide Zionists and Talmudists and Kabbalists an easy target, and to provide the Goyim an unthinking, ready-made form of anti-Semitism that is convenient to Zionists, Talmudists, and Kabbalists. You know, every single one of these men has something in common. They are marketing degeneracy and depravity to Goyim. If you look at what Andrew and Tristan Tate have made their bones doing, I mean, first they were pornographers, second, they're multi-level marketers with the real world, selling supposed entrepreneurial expertise and connections to the people who subscribe to their real world site. It is set up like a multi-level marketing firm. It is a scam. And then there's Nick Fuentes, who says things like he wants to marry a 16-year-old and that dating women or spending time with women is gay. And so here you have this entire generation of disaffected young men latching onto this and making themselves targets for Zionists and Talmudists and Kabbalists, because make no mistake about it, like Jonathan Greenblatt of the LDL point blank said, or the ADL point blank said, he's coming after your jobs. He's coming at your employers. He's coming after your bank accounts. So they're not talking about just simply deplatforming you off of social media. They're talking about making it impossible for you to live, for consuming this content, and they're talking about using this content as a catalyst or a justification for increased regulation of anti-Semitic, or what they characterize as anti-Semitic rhetoric, criticizing Zionism as a racist ideology or an ethno-supremacist ideology is not anti-Semitic. There's nothing immutable or innate about being a Zionist. It's not an ethnicity. It's not a skin color. It's not a biological sex. It is an idea. It's an ethno-supremacist idea. It's extremely racist and supremacist. And Talmudic Judaism is the same way. If you look at what the Talmud says about Gentiles, about Goyim, if you were to substitute any other ethnicity, if this was to be turned around on the Jews, and Christians were to have a Talmud that said these things about the Jews, Christians would be destroyed for it, as racist, as supremacist. And for Kabbalists, it's the same deal. It's this idea that you as a Jew can bend reality to your will through magic in order to obtain whatever end result or objective you seek. At the end of the day, this is what they're after. And the anti-Semites that I've covered in this episode are useful to that end. They're useful to that purpose because they're the ones that get pointed to every single time to justify increased regulation of speech and increased limitations on speech and increased deployment of intimidation against speech through law enforcement, through private employers, through banks. They are building their God world. They are creating the conditions for their Messiah to return or to come. And in doing so, they're going to pave the way for the Antichrist to arrive on earth. And they're going to create an absolutely dystopian result in the process. That's their end goal. That's their end game. And Christian Zionists are somewhat aware of this. But because they believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, that is, they're going to be caught up into heaven before the tribulation, before the Antichrist persecutes them. They're going to be safe, and everyone else is going to be sorry. The reality of it is, there is a very simple solution here. And that is for you not to vote for anyone who professes to be a Zionist. Whether they're a Christian Zionist or a Jewish Zionist. They shouldn't have any influence over your community's policies, over your state's policies, over your country's policies and laws. Like, they have been battery acid to our culture. They shouldn't have any influence or power over culture and entertainment and the norms thereof. So, you're not targeting them because they're ethnically Jewish. You're targeting them because the ideology that they promote is destructive to social order. It's destructive to the Republican ideal that all men are created equal. All men are created in the image of God. That's not what they believe. That's not what they promote. It's not what they promote in Zionism. It's not what they promote in Talmudic belief. It's certainly not what they promote in Kabbalism. And most Goyim, because they don't think critically about what they're consuming and who's actually advancing all of this ideology and all of this explosion of anti-Semitic rhetoric, and they certainly don't think to what end all of this is being suddenly placed out in the open, where anybody can say what they want. You're not thinking, you're not analyzing, you're not thinking critically about it, and you're not thinking rationally about it. There is an underlying purpose to this, and that purpose is to limit your speech, to limit your freedom, and to bring about the conditions for the God world that these fanatics want. They already control so much of the world, but their control is not total yet. You might be deplatformed or kicked off of a social media platform for saying these things, for speaking out against Zionism, for speaking out against the Talmud, for speaking out against the Kabbalah and the Zohar. But what they ultimately seek is for you to be deplatformed from your bank, for you to lose your job, your livelihood, your ability to make a living. They want you to be blacklisted. They want to conflate these ideologies with the immutable characteristic of Jewish ethnicity. And if you don't start thinking critically about what you're consuming and to what end it's being offered to you, they're going to succeed. Make no mistake about it. Everybody I listed in this video tonight, in the Freakin' Weekend episode tonight, is a useful tool of Zionist. They're a useful tool of the Talmud and the Talmudic Jews. They're a useful tool of Kamalas. They're a useful tool of Jewish ethno-supremacists and the ideologies that they seek to serve. I'm Goel, and this has been AntiTribe's Freakin' Weekend. Thank you for watching. As always, we're offering an $8 a month subscription special on AntiTribe, and that $8 a month, $50 a year will get you access to all three of our sites. That is Government Sex Predators, AntiTribe, and Investigations in Ritual Abuse. So you're getting three sites for the price of one, either through an $8 a month subscription or a $50 annual subscription to any one of those sites. Three for the price of one. That's a deal you can't pass up. As always, like and share, subscribe to our content. We are a reader-supported site, and we thank you for every bit of support you can offer us, whether it's disseminating our material, participating in the comments section, or just subscribing, donating, however you want. Over at investigationsritualabuse.com, you can hit the donate button if you'd like to make a direct donation to us. That donation goes back into content and the expenses of generating content, especially at IRA, Investigations of Ritual Abuse, where we spend a lot of money on court records and property records and things of that nature that we use to corroborate the allegations of ritual abuse made by Rachel, Eliza, and Catherine Hamlin, as well as others. Thanks, and God bless.